All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. I am Andrew, aka Anti-Kant Mindgasms for the purposes of this video. I'm going to do another one in my series on the Lacanian / Hegelian / Marxist philosopher Slavoj Zizek's book called Less Than Nothing in my Mindgasms Book review series on his book. And it's basically, as you can see, him obliterating the Nazi Adolf Eichmann, and by criticizing basically destroying Kant's categorical imperative by explaining that Adolf Eichmann and other Nazis used it to justify their Nazi atrocities. So I'm going to pull up my thumbnail here and I'll get into the paragraph and share my thoughts on it. All right, here we go. Okay. Right. Okay, so this section, it doesn't even get into these parts in the first paragraph here, but this is enough to get into. Anyway, this section is called Lacan against Buddhism. Okay, so I'll read and comment on this. All right, so according to the standard critique, the limitation of the Kantian universalistic ethic of the quote-unquote categorical imperative, and he explains it here, the unconditional injunction to, and this is interesting, but I'll let him explain it first. The unconditional injunction to do one's duty resides in its formal indeterminacy. So the limit is in how indeterminate it is, which is interesting because I appreciate him explaining it this way, because previously when I've seen it explained in books and when I've heard philosophers explain it, they have basically used explained it through the example that Kant himself uses, which is why I thought that his categorical imperative I've previously thought that it was actually more determinate and specific, because I thought that his categorical imperative was basically don't lie, always be honest, because he uses the example of the Nazi at the door, and how even if you are in if you are in Nazi Germany and you're hiding an escaped Jew, if a Nazi comes to your door asking if any Jews are there, you should be honest and say that you're hiding a Jew, even though it will unquestionably lead to unspeakable atrocities for that Jewish person. They'll get sent to a concentration camp or just executed right there, or any number of other awful things could happen, obviously, right? Okay, so, but Zizek defines it as Kant's categorical imperative as the unconditional injunction to do one's duty, which for him points out its limitations because it has formal indeterminacy. The moral law does not tell me what my duty is, it merely tells me that I should accomplish my duty, and so leaves room for an empty voluntarism. Whatever I decide will be my duty is my duty. So I think that that's interesting. It's telling you that you should follow your duty, but not what your duty is. And that's interesting. I've been critical of what I've heard that Kant's categorical imperative is before, which is don't lie, even if a Nazi is asking you if you're hiding a Jew, and you are, which will get that Jew killed and or sent to concentration camps. So anyway, I think it's also interesting that he's pointing out that it's actually just the idea of doing your duty and you being able to choose it yourself, which actually sounds like a more of an existentialist approach to life. Like, do what is right, but find your own meaning in life. And a lot of famous existentialists like Nietzsche talked about this a lot, of course. So it sounds like a more existentialist approach to me, because it's all about finding your own meaning in life and your moral code and following that. but he's about to say that the limitation with this way of looking at Kant's categorical imperative is that it leaves open the option for Nazis like Adolf Eichmann to view their, I don't know, their Nazi final solution as their duty or their Nazi ideology. So that is, they can use their Kantian adherence to his categorical imperative as a false intellectual justification for all his atrocities. All right, so let's get back to this here. So where was I? So the categorical imperative leaves room for an empty voluntarism. Whatever I decide will be my duty is my duty. However, far from being a limitation, this very feature brings us to the core of Kantian ethical autonomy. It is not possible to derive the concrete obligations pertaining to one specific situation from the moral law itself, which means that the subject himself must assume the responsibility of translating the abstract injunction into a series of concrete obligations. I think that's interesting because, morality itself is complex, and you're boiling down morality to a series of concrete obligations, which I think is a problem in itself too, because morality is so complex and abstract. Having these harsh rules for morality don't make sense to me. All right, so which means that the subject himself must assume the responsibility of translating the abstract injunction into a series of concrete obligations. The full acceptance of this paradox compels us to reject any reference to duty as an excuse. So paradoxically, you're supposed to follow your duty, but any adherence to your duty is actually, according to Slavoj Zizek, a paradox and an excuse for your behavior. You use it as an excuse for any of your behavior, the way that Adolf Eichmann and other Nazis did to justify their atrocities against Jewish people during World War II, right? Okay, the full acceptance of this paradox compels us to reject any reference to duty as an excuse. I know this is heavy and can be this is a Kant quote. Quote, I know this is heavy and can be painful, but what can I do? What can I do? This is my duty, unquote. Oh, like the justifications of Adolf Eichmann. Kant's ethics is often, and because Adolf Eichmann himself was actually a Kantian too, like he followed Kant's ethics. So Kant's ethics is often taken as justifying such an attitude. No wonder Adolf Eichmann himself referred to Kant when trying to justify his role in planning and executing the Holocaust. He was just doing his duty and obeying the Führer's orders, right? Following orders. That was the famous justification of a lot of Nazis that was not allowed to be used during the Nuremberg trial because because it was not seen as an adequate justification for committing such phenomenal atrocities against innocent people. Right, so he was just doing his duty and obeying the Führer's orders. However, the aim of Kant's emphasis on the subject's full moral autonomy and responsibility was precisely to prevent any such maneuver of putting the blame on some figure of the big other. And this is a reference to his other idea of the big other. And I think that's actually an idea of Lacan that he approves of, which is one of the many reasons that he's a Lacanian who is a psychoanalyst whose philosophy he basically follows. And that's basically, it's kind of what it sounds like almost. It's like this big controlling, all-controlling, all-knowing father God who is responsible for everything that happens. And this is a cop out, he's saying, because part of Kant's emphasis on ethics and part of his categorical imperative is supposed to be the subject's full moral autonomy and responsibility for your actions. So I guess according to Kant, at least, in theory, if you have the full moral autonomy and responsibility for your actions, then you wouldn't do things like use his categorical imperative to justify your Nazi atrocities. So I think that's interesting because it's Slavoj Zizek's really interesting and kind of nuanced thoughts on Kant's categorical imperative. He kind of like completely obliterates it by explaining how it was used by Nazis due to its flaws. But in a way, he's also actually explaining not only that people, he doesn't explain this, but like clearly, like I said, I misunderstood his categorical Kant's categorical imperative as meaning specifically not lie. So he explains it adequately as, you know, basically do your duty. But he also explains in the last part there in particular how part of Kant's categorical imperative is supposed to be taking responsibility for your own actions. And I, I think Kant uses that to justify his own categorical imperative by saying that if you are responsible for your own actions, you wouldn't commit these atrocities. But obviously, I agree that this does leave room open for that. But at the same time, as Zizek was also pointing out, I don't like this adherence to a strict moral code, and I don't like strict moral codes in general. I'm not like a moral relativist, of course. And even though if even quote unquote postmodern ethics is not moral relativism, as I've pointed out many times on my channel before, it's more postmodern ethics itself is more like having rules, but them being flexible and subject to change, which makes more sense, way more sense to me than this sort of really strict more moral compass like that which Kant advocates for in not only his categorical imperative, but Kantian ethics in general. All right, so I think I basically said enough about that. So I hope you appreciated this other newest deep dive philosophy video into Slavoj Zizek's thoughts on, as you can see, Kant modernism, anti-Semitism, and Adolf Eichmann. So I hope you enjoyed me going into that a bit, because philosophy is fascinating, and Slavoj Zizek in particular is one of my favorite and most interesting philosophers because he has very fascinating and sophisticated arguments, even when I disagree with the conclusion, and I learn a lot from him. All right, so yeah, thanks everyone else for watching. Share this everywhere. Share the Mindgasms all over the place, all over the world, with all your friends and everyone you know. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Smash and demolish and obliterate that like button the way that Slavoj Zizek obliterates Adolf Eichmann and Nazis and Kant's categorical imperative. Click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. Next one will probably be another clip on that video I made about the Mormon Apostle Orson Pratt's essay called "The Absurdities of Immaterialism," and this will be a clip in which I'm talking about how he literally refers to Christian immaterialists who believe in an immaterial and or non-physical God are infidels and atheists. He literally calls them infidels. So check that out coming up soon. And check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description as always. And like I always say, most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And Slavoj Zizek is a fascinating philosophical thinker, whether you agree with his ideas or not. And you philosophy nerds who watch these videos, let me know what you think of Slavoj Zizek's thoughts on Kant's categorical imperative, Kant's categorical imperative general, Kant in general. I would say I'm anti-Kant, but I'm not even an expert on his views, but what I've read is way too fucking like sophisticated to the point of almost insanity, which is why some mainstream philosophers even debate whether he's like sophisticated or super insane, or you know what, they're pro Kantians and anti Kantians, of course, for various reasons. Anyway, thanks again everyone for watching. Slavoj Zizek is awesome and fascinating, and most importantly, like I always say, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. Oh, I said that already. All right. Thanks, everyone, again, and adios until next time.